Why prison ministry? And why do we do it the way that we do it? If you look back at the archives from the 60s and 70s, you'll see that prison ministry used to be a major avenue of evangelism for the Church of God. But in the years since, with splits in our organizations and frustrations that some have experienced with the amount of effort expended and the seemingly small amount of fruit yielded, prisoners as a focal point of the gospel have pretty much fallen by the wayside. Now, there are numerous ministers in God's church who visit incarcerated men all over the country. One of the ministers has a blog site where he lists addresses of converted men within the prison system that he recognizes. And I've had the privilege of meeting a group of dedicated men who hold services every other Sabbath in a Tennessee prison. But the one thing these successful prison programs have in common is that at the core group of their participants came to the truth through other avenues: television programs, printed material, and most commonly exposure to the gospel by other prisoners who follow this way of life. In the 18 years I was incarcerated and the 5 years I have run this outreach, I have yet to meet a prisoner who was called or became converted through direct contact with one of God's ministers. Now, that's not to say that that couldn't happen. It just doesn't seem to be the norm. The connections seem to be more easily made from the inside. When men come in from the outside, they are confined to interact in the chapel environment. Now, there are a lot of reasons that men go to a prison chapel, and seeking God, in my experience, is the least of their motivation. In prison, men are routinely demoralized, and the conditions they live in are often horrific. The chapel offers a reprieve, a place where they are treated as human beings by people who truly have their best interest at heart. Men who reach out to the church through correspondence have no motivation apart from their own understanding. There is an army, a literal army, of Protestant and Catholic ministries flooding the prisons with their doctrines. For a person to see through that and reach out to an obscure group like ours for guidance on the scriptures and says something about that person in particular, something you would never discover as a volunteer sitting in a prison chaplain. How God reached me in prison. The article explains how God put certain questions in my mind and how I was struggling with the answers. It goes on to describe several incidents God used to point me to His church, including how He put church material in my hand. Once my hour-long reprieve was over, I found the walkway in front of my cell littered with magazines and magazine-sized envelopes. I knew they were religious books, and I thought I might look them over if my neighbor didn't demand them back. I don't recall how much time elapsed before I read one, but I do remember the emotional response that I had. The gospel of the kingdom explained why I couldn't find the distinction between the Jewish God and the Christian one, and I felt my heart melt as I realized, finally, that I wasn't alone. You see, God had revealed things to me that I could not justify through any religious organization that I was in contact with, and I was in contact with a lot of them. From this time forward and for the next 17 years, I did everything that a prisoner could possibly do to get as much material from these organizations as I would discover who they were into the prison system. God used this little pile of paper, this paper that wasn't even sent to me. He used it to let me know that what He had showed me, He had shown to others. That His church was real and that I wasn't alone. And this act, the reason that I'm pointing this out to you is that this is the foundational act of covenant concept. So I reached out to these people who believed this crazy thing that I did, and over the next 17 years, God performed miracles in my life that I cannot explain apart from His intervention. He gave me a voice. He gave me a platform. He gave me a publication, church services, a Bible study with ministers from 2 different Church of God organizations at the same time. A closed circuit television channel. He provided avenues for me inside of prison that are beyond anything that I have ever known a prisoner to have access to. And now, on the outside, Covenant Concepts, our programs today focus on education as the principal means of rehabilitation. Coincidentally, God used the prison's education department on the inside for that same purpose. My official duties were working for the prison school, 9 years as a publications editor and 3 years as a high school tutor. It was through the education department that God gave me access to all of the tools that I use to promote the gospel message on the inside. So continuing in that vein and knowing that not everyone is called, the vehicle we use today to deliver the gospel is the education of prisoners. We offer a free book to any prisoner who writes for one on the educational subject that they are most interested in. We focus our efforts on subjects that would provide them gainful employment on the outside or help them overcome some personal issue on the inside. Each new client is provided with either a copy of a church publication, a periodical, or a copy of a self-help book, Finding the Fundamentals. In the back of our book is contact information for several of the leading Church of God organizations and recommendations for key publications, as well as exposure to the gospel message, to the truth, to the Church of God. We also ask our clients who have no interest in spiritual matters, and there are quite a few of those, to pass our publications on to people that they think would, or even leave them in a place that other prisoners might find them. You see, it's not always about the delivery method as much as it is about having the material where it's needed most. We believe in the time that this world has left, God will call more of the base of this world. More people like Moses and Jacob and David and Paul, more liars and killers and cons. I don't know how many people have to go to prison to realize where this world has led them wrong, but I do know where a lot of people are who have finally come to the end of themselves. And that is where Covenant Concepts is going to continue to look for them. So if you know how much heaven rejoices over one sinner who repents, if you know that much is required where much is forgiven, and if you believe that God calls the foolish things of this world to confound the wise, then you're right where you're supposed to be. And we appreciate your support.